Okay, let's dive deep today. We are wading into, well, probably one of the most talked about, most sensationalized, and honestly legally tangled international cases, maybe ever. The Amanda Knox case.
Oh, absolutely. It's a name everyone recognizes.
Right. Born in Seattle, 1987. Amanda Knox was just 20 years old, a typical American student heading abroad. She picks Perugia, Italy, for her study year in 2007.
Looking for something maybe a bit quieter than Florence, fewer tourists.
Exactly. But that decision kicked off this unbelievable 8-year legal roller coaster. Just an extraordinary journey through courts, forensics, everything.
Roller coaster is a good word for it. I mean, it was defined by these huge swings: accusation, conviction, prison time, nearly 4 years served with a 26-year sentence.
And then?
Acquittal. But not just one acquittal, multiple trials, reversals. It was messy. The whole thing took 8 years before Italy's highest court, the Court of Cassation, finally ruled definitively innocent of the murder of her flatmate, Meredith Kercher.
And that's where it gets so fascinating for our deep dive today. Because for years, the image most people had wasn't based on, evidence. It was shaped entirely by this intense media storm.
You mean Foxy Noxy?
That exact nickname. Instantly recognizable, right? And it completely dominated the narrative. It almost became a stand-in for actual facts in the public mind.
Yeah, and that nickname often came hand in hand with leaks from the prosecution focusing on her personality, her behavior, maybe perceived promiscuity. It really felt like character assassination.
Making it incredibly hard, especially early on, to see past the headlines and figure out what was actually happening with the investigation, the evidence, the legal process itself.
Precisely. It was almost impossible to separate the sensational story from the core legal and forensic facts.
So that's our job today. We're going to try and cut through all that noise, guide you through this legal maze. We'll get into the initial police work, those really controversial interrogations.
Yeah, the ones that violated her rights.
We'll look at the huge back and forth over the DNA evidence across those 3 trials. And finally, we need to examine the fallout, the legal consequences that linger even now.
Including that one conviction that remarkably still stands against her, even after the highest court cleared her of the murder itself. It's complex.
Okay, let's set the scene. Perugia, 2007. As you said, Knox chose it for her academic year. She ends up sharing a ground-floor apartment Via della Pergola 7.
Right, with Meredith Kercher, who was a 21-year-old British exchange student from Leeds, and there were 2 other Italian women living there too.
And the terrible discovery happens just after noon on Friday, November 2nd, 2007. Knox had spent the previous night at her boyfriend's place, Raffaele Solicito.
He was a 23-year-old Italian student studying software engineering.
So Knox gets back to her apartment the next day, and things are off. The front door isn't properly closed, it's ajar. She sees blood spots in one of the bathrooms, even a bloody footprint.
And crucially, Meredith Kercher's bedroom door is locked, which wasn't normal for her.
Now, this sequence, how she reacted, how the alarm was raised, this became a huge point of contention later for the prosecution, didn't it?
Absolutely. They really focused on her reaction time and her actions. So what she does first is call Meredith's phone. No answer.
Then she calls one of her Italian roommates, Filomena Romanelli. She sounds worried, speaking a mix of Italian and English.
Right, expressing concern. Solicito gets involved pretty quickly.
Yeah.
He's the one who actually calls the Carabinieri, the police, around 12:51 p.m.
And what does he report?
He reports the strange situation. The door being open, the blood, the locked room, basically a possible break-in.
Then Romanelli arrives at the apartment, and another worrying sign emerges.
Yes, Meredith's English mobile phone had been found tossed in a nearby garden. That's obviously a very bad sign. Romanelli wants the police to break down Kercher's door immediately.
But they refused at first.
But initially, yeah. They cited policy saying they couldn't just damage private property without stronger evidence of a serious crime. It suggests they maybe weren't thinking murder right away.
Which is kind of understandable, I suppose, at that very first moment. But things escalated quickly.
They did. It actually took Romanelli's friend stepping in and physically kicking the door down. And that's when they found Meredith Kercher's body on the floor, covered with a duvet.
She had died from blood loss. Multiple stab wounds to the neck, just horrific.
Truly horrific. And the focus of the investigation shifted almost immediately away from just the crime scene itself and onto the behavior of Knox and Solicito.
Detective Monica DiPolione specifically.
Yes, she questioned Knox quite intensely about why she didn't raise the alarm faster, why she might have tried to clean up some blood spots actions the police immediately labeled anomalous.
And this perception was fueled by those wild media reports later, wasn't it? Claims they were kissing, cuddling, even doing cartwheels outside while waiting for the police.
Exactly. Those reports, whether true, exaggerated, or false, fed into this narrative of strange, inappropriate behavior. But the police were also looking at the physical scene, specifically the broken window in Romanelli's room.
And the lead detective, Marco Chiacchiera, Napoleone's superior, he made a snap judgment.
A very quick and, you could argue, very consequential judgment. He looked at the broken window and decided right away it was faked. Clearly faked by the killer, was his assessment.
Wow. So dismissing the break-in theory almost immediately really narrowed the focus, didn't it?
Hugely. It steered the investigation away from the possibility of an unknown intruder and pointed it straight towards people who knew Meredith, people who had access to the apartment, which led inevitably to the focus on Knox and Solicito.
And the arrests came just 4 days later. Knox and Solicito gave their alibi.
They said they were at Solicito's place the night before, watched the movie Amélie, smoked some marijuana.
But Solicito's initial account was a bit shaky.
Yeah, initially he couldn't definitively say if Knox had been with him the entire evening. That little bit of uncertainty was something the prosecution really seized on later.
So by November 6th, Knox, Solicito, and also Knox's boss from the bar where she worked part-time, Lachik, Patrick Lumumba, they were all arrested.
Lumumba's arrest was based on Knox's statement during that disputed interrogation, but he was cleared very quickly.
He had a solid alibi from customers at the bar. He was released.
But that accusation Knox made against him, that became the basis for the calumnia charge, the defamation or slander conviction that stuck with her legally for so long, even after everything else.
Okay, so Lumumba's out. The focus is tight on Knox and Solicito, based partly on behavior, partly on the faked break-in theory. But then the investigation finds something solid, something physical.
Finally, yes, Rudy Guade.
Tell us about him.
Guade was a 20-year-old immigrant from Ivory Coast. He was known around Perugia, had a history of petty crime, burglaries, and crucially, his physical traces were found at the crime scene.
What kind of traces?
Bloody fingerprints on Meredith's belongings. He actually fled to Germany soon after the murder, but was arrested there and extradited back to Italy.
And Guade chose a specific legal path.
He opted for the rito abbreviato, the fast-track trial. Basically, it means the trial proceeds just on the written evidence collected by the prosecution, no live witnesses or cross-examination. If you're convicted, you get a standard sentence reduction, usually by a third.
So he was tried separately and quickly.
Yes. In October 2008, he was convicted of both sexual assault and murder.
And his sentence?
Initially 30 years. That got reduced on appeal to 16 years. And eventually, by 2020, he was actually allowed to finish his sentence doing community service.
Okay, but here's a really critical point, right? Even though Guade was convicted of the murder.
Yes, this is key. The official judge's report explaining his conviction stated specifically that Guade had not used a knife himself, and he hadn't inflicted the deepest, likely fatal stab wound.
So the evidence pointed to multiple attackers.
Yeah.
Or at least the court's interpretation did.
Exactly. The court concluded Guade couldn't have acted alone. The nature of the wounds, combined with the prosecution's theory of the staged break-in, it all required accomplices.
And the theory became Guade as the sexual aggressor.
Right, maybe overpowering Meredith, but that Knox and Solicito were the ones who brought and used the knife, delivered the fatal blow.
So Guade's conviction, paradoxically, almost locked in the need for Knox and Solicito to be involved, according to the court's reasoning.
Precisely. It created a judicial necessity for accomplices. Even if the physical evidence directly linking Knox and Solicito was weak or non-existent, the logic of the Guade verdict demanded their participation.
And Guade himself, did his story support this?
Well, initially his statements didn't mention Knox or Solicito being there, but later on his account changed and he started indirectly implicating them, which of course only reinforced the prosecution's conspiracy theory, and that judicial requirement for accomplices really put immense pressure on the pre-trial phase involving Knox and Solicito. The focus intensified massively on Knox's character, and especially on that interrogation.
Right, let's get into that interrogation because it's central to so much of what followed. The legal distinction in Italy between a witness and a suspect seems really important here.
It's absolutely critical. Knox went to the police station voluntarily as a witness, someone who found the body, but she ended up being questioned for hours and hours over November 5th and 6th.
And her account of what happened during those hours is harrowing.
It is. She later testified about intense pressure, manipulation, claims she was denied food, water, bathroom breaks, that police told her conflicting things to confuse her. She even alleged quite seriously that a policewoman hit her on the head.
An accusation, we should note, that she was later charged with slandering the police over, but was ultimately acquitted of that specific charge in 2016.
Correct. The core legal problem, though, was her status. Under Italian law, the Code of Criminal Procedure, you only have the right to a lawyer once you're formally declared a suspect.
Before that.
Before that, you're considered a persona informata sui fatti, basically, a person informed about the facts, a witness. And witnesses don't automatically get lawyers during questioning.
So police could question her extensively without legal counsel present, as long as she was technically just a witness.
Exactly. She was kept in that witness status for a very long time, subjected to what she described as psychologically grueling interviews. The police, for their part, testified they were just being firm but polite.
Knox also claimed the interpreter wasn't neutral, that the interpreter suggested she was traumatized and couldn't remember properly, pushing her to come up with a different story.
Yes, she described feeling completely overwhelmed, confused, brainwashed was the term she used. And it was during this period, under this immense pressure, that she made the statement placing herself at the scene and, crucially, accusing Patrick Lumumba.
A statement she then formally retracted fairly quickly, saying it was coerced.
Right. But the damage was done. The police had obtained this statement, seemingly implicating herself and shifting blame onto Lumumba, all arguably achieved by exploiting that legal gray area before formally naming her a suspect.
And that statement directly led to the calumnia charge, the defamation against Lumumba. The prosecution argued it wasn't coerced, but a deliberate lie to mislead them.
Which became its own separate legal battle alongside the murder charge. Meanwhile, while the legal system was figuring out her status, the media had already made up its mind.
Oh, the pretrial publicity was just off the charts, wasn't it? It felt relentless.
Unprecedented, really, and fueled massively by leaks coming from the prosecution's side. Details about her private life, her journal entries, painting this picture of her as, wild, emotionless, sexually driven.
There was even a best-selling book in Italy that basically fictionalized parts of her life.
Yes, imagining or inventing incidents. It all fed into the Foxy Knoxy persona. The defense complained constantly that this was trial by media, pure character assassination, designed to prejudice the court because the forensic evidence was so thin.
And this is where you really saw a split in perception internationally, right? Especially between Italy and the U.S.
Absolutely. In the U.S., many legal experts and commentators were horrified. They saw the intense pretrial publicity, the focus on character over facts, and worried about the fairness of the Italian system.
There were even suggestions of anti-American bias playing a role, and criticism of Knox's initial defense team for perhaps not fighting back aggressively enough against the character attacks early on.
Yeah, the view from the U.S. was often one of a flawed process, maybe even a runaway prosecution influenced by media frenzy. Whereas in Italy, at least initially, the perception for many was perhaps more accepting of the prosecution's narrative. It highlights how powerful early leaks and a strong media narrative can be, especially when the defendant is a foreigner.
Okay, let's shift gears to the core of the legal battle, the forensics. This is where the case really went back and forth, leading to those completely opposite verdicts. The first conviction, back in 2009, rested heavily on just a couple of key pieces of contested evidence, right?
That's right. Essentially two main pillars for the prosecution. First, tiny fragments identified as Rafael Sollecito's DNA found on Meredith Kercher's bra clasp, which was recovered from the crime scene.
Okay, Sollecito's DNA on the bra clasp. What was the second piece?
The second was a large kitchen knife found at Sollecito's apartment. The prosecution alleged this was the murder weapon, claiming they found traces of Meredith Kercher's DNA on the blade and Knox's DNA on the handle.
So Sollecito's DNA on the bra clasp, Kercher's DNA on the knife blade, that sounds potentially damning.
On the surface, yes. But the prosecution's theory had to incorporate Rudy Gued, whose evidence was undeniably everywhere in the room.
Right. How do they explain that?
Their narrative was that Knox and Sollecito were almost superhumanly careful. They supposedly carried out this meticulous selective cleanup, wiped away every single trace of their own presence, no hair, no fibers, no fingerprints, no skin cells of theirs, anywhere in the murder room or on the body.
But somehow, they left all of Gued's abundant evidence, his bloody fingerprints, his DNA, completely untouched.
Exactly. And then, after this perfect selective cleanup, they supposedly staged the break-in by smashing Romanelli's window.
That theory just sounds difficult.
It was immediately problematic, and the defense really hammered this point. The absence of evidence linking Knox or Solicito to the actual room where the murder happened was overwhelming. Zero footprints, zero hairs, zero fibers, absolutely nothing belonging to them found on Meredith's body or clothes.
While Guade's traces were.
Everywhere. His DNA was on the bra strap itself, mixed with Kercher's. His DNA was on a vaginal swab taken from Meredith. His bloody palm print was right there on a pillow found under her body. His DNA mixed with hers on her sweatshirt, her bag. It was extensive.
So the defense argument was, how could this perfect cleanup possibly happen? Removing only their traces while leaving Guade's obvious evidence behind. It just doesn't make logical sense.
Exactly. The defense actually requested an independent review of that initial DNA analysis during the first trial.
But they were turned down.
They were. And the court accepted the prosecution's forensic findings regarding the knife and bra clasp, seemingly without significant questions about contamination at that stage, which led to the first conviction.
Okay, so conviction in the first trial. Then comes the appeal, the second-grade trial, or Corte d'Assise d'Appello, in 2011. This is basically a whole new trial in the Italian system.
Essentially, yes. And the appeal judges, Hellman and Zanetti, made a crucial decision. They agreed to what the defense had wanted all along. They ordered independent, court-appointed experts to re-examine that key DNA evidence.
And who did they appoint?
Professors Stefano Vecchiotti and Carla Vecchiotti, highly respected forensic biologists.
And their review. Was it significant?
It was utterly devastating for the prosecution's case. Their independent report found, and I quote, numerous basic errors in how the original forensic evidence was collected and analyzed by the police labs.
Wow. Okay, what about the knife, the alleged murder weapon?
Vecchiotti and Vecchiotti concluded that the tiny trace amount of DNA attributed to Kercher on the blade was below the internationally accepted threshold for reliable analysis. They called it not an evidential trace. Basically, they ruled it couldn't be reliably attributed to Kercher at all. Poof, knife link gone.
Okay, so the knife evidence collapses under independent review. What about the bra clasp? Solicito's DNA was definitely on it, right?
Yes, his DNA profile was found, but the independent experts highlighted the massive contamination risk. Remember, that bra clasp wasn't collected immediately. It lay on the floor of the crime scene.
So how long?
For 47 days. 47 days before it was finally picked up and bagged.
47 days. On the floor of a crime scene being processed.
Exactly. Exposed to dust, movement, multiple investigators walking through. The experts found DNA from several unidentified males on it, besides Solicito's. They testified that the context, especially that huge delay, strongly suggested contamination.
So the two main forensic pillars just crumbled under independent scrutiny.
Completely. And based on this, the appeal judges, Hellman and Zanetti, wrote their reasoning, the Hellman rationale. They concluded there was a material non-existence of evidence connecting Knox or Solicito to the murder.
They also addressed Knox's behavior during the interrogation.
Yes, they found it explainable by the pressure of those obsessive duration interviews, the coercion. They even pointed out that her initial calls to her roommate and the police actually contradicted the prosecution's theory that she tried to delay the discovery of the body.
So the result?
Acquittal. Knox and Solicito were acquitted and freed in October 2011. Huge international news.
But then came the Italian Supreme Court, the Court of Cassation, which can do something pretty unusual compared to, say, the U.S. system.
Right. The prosecution can appeal acquittals in Italy. And they did. In 2013, the Supreme Court took the fairly rare step of throwing out the acquittals.
Why? Did they say Hellman and Zanetti got the science wrong?
Not exactly. Their ruling was more procedural. They argued the appeal court, Hellman's court, had gone too far, acting like primary investigators. They criticized Hellman for not ordering new DNA tests on the knife, even though the independent review said the sample was too low to be reliable. They also said Hellman ignored circumstantial evidence, like that confused note Knox wrote at the police station.
So they didn't reinstate the guilty verdict, but they ordered another trial.
Exactly. A completely new appeal trial, the third time around the block. This one was presided over by Judge Nancini.
And did this Nancini court order new tests on the knife?
Yes. They granted a prosecution request to test a tiny, previously untested biological trace on the knife blade.
And the result?
Same as the independent review found. No DNA belonging to Meredith Kercher was found on that sample either.
So even the new testing ordered by the court failed to link the knife to Kercher?
Correct. Scientifically, the knife link was definitively debunked multiple times.
Yet, Judge Nancini still found them guilty again in January 2014. How?
It's baffling from a purely forensic standpoint. The Nincini court's reasoning seemed to rely heavily on sort of abstract judicial logic rather than the scientific findings. They emphasized Rudy Gued's conviction, the one that required accomplices as a fixed legal fact, a judicial reference point.
So because Gued was convicted and needed accomplices.
And because the physical evidence didn't actually show Knox and Solicito were involved, the court basically concluded the lack of evidence must itself be evidence of guilt.
Wait, how does that work?
Their theory was the only way to explain the absence of Knox's and Solicito's DNA was that they must have performed an incredibly sophisticated cleanup operation that successfully removed every single trace of themselves while somehow leaving Gueda's traces perfectly intact. It's a very theoretical argument.
It sounds like they were convicted based on the absence of evidence, interpreted as proof of a cleanup.
That's essentially what the reasoning implies. Which brings us back to contamination.
Yay.
Experts worldwide were weighing in by this point. Professor Peter Gill, a renowned DNA expert, publicly explained how easily that tiny trace of Solicito's DNA could have gotten onto the bra clasp through secondary transfer. Simple investigator error. Imagine Solicito touches a door handle in the apartment. An investigator touches the same handle, maybe with a latex glove, then touches the bra clasp much later inside the bedroom. Boom, DNA transferred. Especially given the 47-day delay, contamination was almost inevitable.
So 3 trials, 3 completely different outcomes. Guilty, innocent, guilty again. All based on interpreting the same flawed, contested forensic evidence. It really highlights how subjective this can all become.
It absolutely does. It shows the danger of letting theories drive the interpretation of evidence rather than the other way around.
Okay, so after that 3rd trial, the Nincini guilty verdict, we're back to square one, almost.
Right.
But the absolute final step was another appeal to the highest court, the Supreme Court of Cassation, in 2015. And this time, their ruling was meant to end it.
Yes, this was the final definitive judgment. In March 2015, the Supreme Court of Cassation completely annulled the convictions. They acquitted Knox and Solicito once and for all.
And critically, the wording here matters, right? They didn't just say, not enough evidence.
Exactly, that's crucial. They didn't use the formula for acquittal based on insufficient evidence. They ruled the case was without foundation. Their finding was essentially one of innocence assoluzione per non aver commesso fatto, meaning they did not commit the act. They were found innocent of involvement in the murder.
And the written report explaining this final decision, it didn't hold back on the earlier investigation, did it?
Not at all. It was incredibly critical. The judges cited glaring errors, investigative amnesia, and what they called sensational failures, clamorous defaillance in how the initial investigation was conducted.
They specifically called out the lower courts, too.
Yes, for culpable omissions, culpabili omissioni, basically blaming the lower courts for repeatedly ignoring the independent expert testimony that clearly showed the evidence was unreliable due to contamination and flawed methodology.
So the highest court basically said the whole foundation was rotten.
Pretty much. The delegate Supreme Judge, summarizing the decision, stated it plainly. Zero evidence proved Knox or Solicito were even at the crime scene when it happened. And they could not have materially participated in the homicide because none of their biological traces were found in the room or on the victim, where, in stark contrast, Gued's traces were abundant. Case closed on the murder charge, finally.
Murder charge closed. Innocence established by the highest court. But the legal saga wasn't quite over because of that initial interrogation.
Right. The consequences of that interrogation night continued to ripple. In 2019, the European Court of Human Rights, ECHR, weighed in.
What did they rule?
They ruled that Italy had violated Amanda Knox's rights back in November 2007 during those initial hours of questioning, specifically by failing to provide her with a lawyer and a competent, unbiased interpreter when she was effectively being treated as a suspect but hadn't been formally notified.
So international confirmation that the interrogation process itself was flawed, violating her basic defense rights. Italy was ordered to pay her damages.
Yes, $18,400 in damages. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was a significant legal victory confirming the illegality of how that initial statement was obtained.
And armed with this ECHR ruling, Knox tried to get the one remaining conviction overturned, the calumnia, the slander against Patrick Lumumba.
Exactly. Her argument was straightforward. The ECHR confirmed the interrogation violated her rights. The statement accusing Lumumba came directly from that illegal interrogation. Therefore, the conviction based on that statement should be thrown out.
It seems logical. What happened?
Here's the final, almost unbelievable twist in this whole saga. Despite the Supreme Court acquittal for murder, despite the ECHR ruling, an Italian appeals court just recently, in June 2024, upheld the slander conviction against Knox for accusing Lumumba.
They upheld it, even after the ECHR ruling.
They upheld it. It's quite extraordinary. She won't serve any more time for it. The sentence was deemed covered by the almost 4 years she'd already spent in prison for the murder she didn't commit.
But the conviction itself remains on her record.
It does. It stands as this strange, lingering legal artifact. A conviction stemming directly from police conduct that Italy's highest court called a sensational failure and Europe's human rights court ruled was illegal. It's a profound paradox.
So, with the main legal battle finally over, definitive innocence on the murder charge, Knox returns to the U.S. How did she rebuild her life after such an ordeal?
Well, she focused on education first, completing her university degree, and then she channeled her experience into writing and advocacy. Her first memoir, Waiting to be Heard, came out in 2013.
Proceeds from that book
Went entirely to paying off the enormous legal debts she'd accumulated over those years in Italy. We're talking millions.
And she became involved in advocacy work.
Yes, very much so. She became a prominent voice for the wrongfully accused, working with organizations like the Innocence Project. She also hosted a show for a while.
Right, the Scarlet Letter reports on Facebook Watch.
Exactly. And the theme of that show is very telling. It examined the gendered nature of public shaming, looking at how women, in particular, are often targeted and judged by the media and public opinion, clearly drawing on her own experience.
And in a really symbolic move, she actually went back to Italy in 2019.
She did, 4 years after the final acquittal, not just as a tourist, but as a keynote speaker at a criminal justice conference in Modena.
And the panel she was on.
It was explicitly titled Trial by Media, a pretty powerful statement.
But her public presence hasn't been without controversy, has it? The family of Meredith Kercher, for example.
No, it hasn't been universally welcomed. The Kercher family, often speaking through their lawyer, have expressed unhappiness with her public profile. They've suggested she's trying to profit from the tragedy, from Meredith's murder, by staying in the spotlight.
And there was that controversy around the movie Stillwater.
Right. The 2021 film starring Matt Damon. It was clearly inspired by her story, though fictionalized. Knox publicly criticized the filmmakers, accusing them of ripping off her story and life without her consent, potentially damaging her reputation further for their own gain.
It really shows that even when the courts declare you innocent, reclaiming your own narrative and reputation from the public consciousness is a whole separate battle.
It's relentless. Absolutely. Alongside all this public scrutiny and advocacy, she's also built a personal life. She married Christopher Robinson, an author, back in 2020.
And they have children now.
Yes, they have 2 children, a daughter born in 2021 and a son born just last year in 2023.
What an incredibly complex journey. 8 years, 3 trials, guilty, innocent, guilty, then definitively innocent. It's almost hard to keep track. If you, listening, take away just a couple of things from this deep dive, what should they be?
I think 2 things stand out starkly. First, just how incredibly vulnerable forensic evidence, especially trace DNA, is to contamination. The whole saga with that bra clasp.
Lost for 47 days.
47 days on a crime scene floor. It's a textbook example of how easily evidence can be compromised if collection protocols aren't perfect, absolutely rigorous. It's a huge warning about the limitations of forensic science when it's not handled impeccably.
Okay, contamination vulnerability. What's the second key takeaway?
The sheer impact of the differences between legal systems, the fact that in Italy the prosecution can appeal an acquittal and win, is what kept this case churning for years.
Right, leading to those devastating reversals, sending someone back to prison after they've been declared innocent. That's just not something that happens in the U.S. system generally.
Exactly. It prolonged the agony and the uncertainty massively until the very highest court finally had to step in and say, enough.
So let's try and connect all these threads one last time.
Yeah.
Italy's Supreme Court ultimately declared Knox and Solicito innocent of the murder. They used incredibly strong language, sensational failures, glaring errors, investigative amnesia to describe the police work.
Absolutely scathing criticism from the highest court.
And yet, the one conviction that still stands against Amanda Knox today is that slander charge against Patrick Lumumba, a charge that came directly out of the police interrogation methods.
The very same methods the European Court of Human Rights ruled were illegal and violated our fundamental rights. It's an unavoidable, almost jarring paradox.
Which leaves us, and you, with a really tough question to think about. If the highest court confirms you are innocent of the main crime and points to massive errors in how the investigation was handled, What does it truly mean when the only conviction left standing stems directly from those flawed, rights-violating police tactics used against you when you were wrongfully accused?
Yeah, can the legal system ever fully untangle the consequences of actions taken under duress during a wrongful accusation, even after innocence is proven? It makes you wonder, when does justice finally stop chasing the ghost of a flawed investigation? Can the truth ever fully erase the mark left by the process itself?